Okay. Welcome everybody to Diaspora Wire TV. I'm your host, Shimi Lore. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to all our old and new subscribers to subscribe to our channel, and thank you for liking our comments. Today, we are speaking with two special guests, very special guests from Equatorial Guinea to speak about the Vice President of Equatorial Guinea, Obiang Menge. Now, recently, Mr. Obiang Menge and his lavish lifestyle, I updated you all on how the UK government has placed, let's say, anti-corruption sanctions against the vice president for his embezzlement and lavish lifestyle, as well recently with the French highest court of appeal upheld a guilty verdict against the vice president of Equatorial Guinea for embezzlement. So here to educate us and speak to us more on what is going on in Equatorial Guinea and how this is being impacted on the people of Equatorial Guinea, I have my two special guests, which is one, Tutu Alicante, who is founder of Equatorial Guinea Justice, which is egjustice.org, a lawyer by trade, working as a legal consultant in with international NGOs in promoting legal accountability and transparency. Also, we have with us today is lawyer Lucas Olu, sorry about that, who has worked for Transparency International and Dow Jones compliance consultant, and now is working with the European Union in promoting good governance and human rights in Equatorial Guinea. Thank you both of you all for joining the show. I really do appreciate it, to taking the time out and just joining us and telling us about and educating us about Equatorial Guinea. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Sorry, Gina, I may not be able to hear you right now.
Oh, okay. What about now? Can you hear us now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. So before we get into the meat of the guilty verdict that was upheld against the French court for embezzlement and properties that were seized, I want you to tell us about the history, the backstory of the Obiang Menge family. We know that the current sitting president, is in power for, I think, 42 years now. So just give us a backstory of the family, how he came into power and how the vice president came into power as well.
All right. Is that a question for Lucas or myself?
Either one of you all can take it if you'd like. It's all right. Lucas
is a student of history, so I'll let Lucas answer.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, Lucas, if you're ready.
Thank you. I'll start, if I may. Yes, one of the, well, as you mentioned, the country is run by the same president since 1979, which is more or less when I was born. So all my life I've seen the same system in place in the country, and which already tells us about how the system can be rigged, how the system can be maintained for such a long time without any alternates in power. And that's in part because of a governance structure of the country that is even by law, and it's set in the constitution as non-being fully democratic, if I may say, or at all democratic at all. So, which means, for instance, that the presidency controls also the parliament and controls, let's say, the executive and the legislative. But it's even written that the presidency also controls the judiciary, which is something that you might not be able to see in any modern constitution. Maybe in the medieval times, you can find something similar. but it also it's how it explains in part because there is another more relevant or even as relevant as this one, which is the type of repression that can happen or liberties in terms of human rights that also affects the fact that the same system is in place for such a long time. Having said that, of course, this is comparatively, if we see other countries around the region, you will see similar situations in Cameroon, will see something similar in Gabon, in Congo, Brazzaville. So we think, I think in part that it's also this context that helped also they helped each other some one way or another to maintain themselves in the power positions without allowing any true alternance or change, democratic change, if I may say. But maybe Tutu can speak more about this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Lucas has captured the picture very, very well. I mean, I think the only two things I would add, or perhaps three things I would add. One is the history of Equatorial Guinea pre the Obiangs, to note that, we were colonized, and I think we are we are the only sub-Saharan African country that was colonized by Spain. And at the time we're gaining independence when in Spain you have an absolute dictator in Franco, right? So all the institutions that we're inheriting are institutions, they're non-democratic by nature, right? Because you have for 200 years been living under colonial Spain, and now you're gaining independence, so to speak, from an absolute dictator. So everything that we inherited come from that history. The other two things, I mean, I think one, what Ruka is describing here is something I often refer to as a perfect state capture, where every source of power, legislative, executive, etc., all resides basically in one family, right? And this, yes, there are similar situations in other places, but I think there is a serious gravity in a place like Equatorial Guinea, given the size of the country. You don't have millions of people in Equatorial Guinea. Up until recently, we just 700,000 people. Now, apparently, we are 1.2 million people. But not even when the context is that small and power resides in one family, every single day in your life, you live that absolute dictatorship. You live it, you live it in all the interactions that you have, because the country is completely militarized, right? Given the size and the fact that they have to protect that family. And then the other thing, is that, once we discovered oil in the mid 1990s, 1994, 1995, we started producing oil and became immediately, the country with the highest GDP per capita on the African continent. What you saw there, is turning that political power, turning that authoritarianism into kleptocracy. So now we have a perfect marriage between kleptocracy and authoritarianism in Equatorial Guinea.
I see. Well, which makes complete sense why the country is in the state that it's in today. So thank you so much for that. So explain to the audience also, how did the son, Obiang Menge, come to power, and what validated him as being vice president of Equatorial Guinea, before we get into his lavish lifestyle?
Yes. So, I mean, the context that Lucas and I are describing of absolute kleptocracy, absolute authoritarianism, means one in which that one family does with the country what they see, what they deem appropriate. They rule the country as their own private property, right? So from early on, as soon as Theodorine, I don't want to say could reason, because he still cannot reason. As soon as he came of age, he began to acquire power. Initially, it was just economic power, because he wasn't old enough to hold any political position. Then as soon as I think he was 18 years old or 19 years old when they made him Minister of Agriculture, Livestock. And,
excuse me, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again? You said, what age was he when he came into power as Minister of what?
Agriculture, livestock, forestry. I think there might have been another portfolio in that ministry, but he was 90 years old, if I'm not mistaken here, right?
Wow.
So, and again, that tells you it's not because of his qualification, but because that gives him access to a source of money, a source of money transfers into power in this context, right?
Right.
And that is the case with him, and that is the case with all the other presidential children. President Obiang, it is claimed he has dozens of kids, many of them biological, some non-biological, but most of these kids are people they have since they became of age, being in positions in the government. They allows them not to govern, not to make policies that benefit the people, but rather to extract money for them, for their own private benefits.
I see. Wow. I see. Wow. Unbelievable. And Equatorial Guinea is supposed to be a democracy, correct? Am I correct on that?
It depends on what we
But it
mean by
seems like it's
democracy.
ran by as a monarchy, so to speak, or dynasty.
Well, if by being a democracy means that you have democracy in your name, yes, you know, we the Democratic Republic of Equatorial Guinea, we the ruling party is the Democratic Party of Equatorial Guinea, so there's democracy all over the place, except that democracy does not exist, right? This is a place that, as we're trying to tell you, one family has run this country since 1979, right? And even prior to that, Obiang's uncle was the president, Francisco Macias, you know, so you can, you really can call a country a democracy when there is no political opposition allowed to contest power, when there is no independent journalist allowed to report independently objectively about what's happening in the country, where human rights activists and human rights defenders are constantly arrested, constantly thrown in jail, you know, so I don't know that we can legitimately call that a democracy, but they do have democracy in their names and in their parties and their t-shirts and everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so last question about the family. Is it true that prior to, you know, like you said, his uncle was in power, is it true that the current sitting president ousted his uncle out of power?
Yes, yes. In the 3rd of August of 1979, there was a coup where the current president ousted the former president, which was the first president after the independence. And of course, this came after 11 years of brutal dictatorship. There were killings, massive killings in the country. A lot of people left the country during those years. And in a way, it was seen as a new sort of wave or new air, fresh air coming in. But at the end of the day, we have to say, and it's objectively as it can be seen as such, is the fact that the similar people that were in the previous regime were still in the following regime. So things did change. To be honest, things did change, but not to the extent that it was expected to become a full democracy. Equatorial Guinea was actually one of the countries or colonial territories that actually had democracy before even the metropolis, which is Spain. They held elections in Equatorial Guinea when Franco was a dictator in Spain. So that was gave a sense of hope to a new independent country, African independent country back in the time. But as it happened in other countries, things turned very, very dark.
I see, I see. Okay, so moving fast forward to this case. Now, the case in France, we heard that on July 28th, France, the highest appeal court upheld a guilty verdict against Obiang Menge for embezzlement. And just explain to us about, we know that he's had lavish lifestyle spending. I've read articles on how the Swedish government, I believe they seized property, if I think it was a yacht or maybe some collection of luxury vehicles as well. They seized that. along with many other items that were seized. Of course, with this recent one with France, they seized a mansion that had 100 rooms and a hairdressing salon inside the room. So just give us the backstory on the years of seizing property, him purchasing property back again, and what came to this verdict of the guilty verdict against him in France. If anyone of you guys can take that.
So Lucas, if you're okay with it, I want to give a little bit of a context as to why these type of cases are important. And then I'll talk a little bit, Lucas, about the case in the US, other cases, and then I'll let you go deeper, Lucas, into the case in France, if that's okay with you. And I wanted to give that background, because I think among us Africans, we have to dispel the myth that it is a bad thing for European countries, European courts, European judges to be holding our kleptocrats accountable. There have been many Africans writing to me criticizing, why is it that, we are allowing France to continue to colonize Equatorial Guinea, other countries, by holding our presidents accountable when we cannot hold the Spanish kleptocrats or European kleptocrats, for that matter, or American kleptocrats accountable in our countries. And I think it's important to understand that, the hope of every African, the hope of any citizen should be to hold corrupt people accountable, right? You cannot have a country, whether it's Equatorial Guinea, whether it's Chad, Cameroon, Congo, Brazzaville, any country, where millions of dollars are disappearing all into accounts belonging to a presidential family in Belgium, in Paris, in the US, in other places, while people in our countries do not have hospitals, do not have schools, do not have those basic necessities, right? And this is exactly what was happening in Equatorial Guinea. There's complete impunity in Equatorial Guinea. No one can hold Theodorin, not a single judge. There is no judge in my country that could accept a case filed against Theodorin or against the president or against the president's wife or against any member of that family, right? So knowing that, having created that perfect system of absolute impunity, since the 80s, Theodorin started inside the country extorting money from individual business people, private business people. That money would then come to Europe, Paris, Switzerland, France, USA, and other places. And that money later on would be used to provide the lavish lifestyle that you've been discussing, right? Buying 2 multi-million-dollar yachts, Ice and Ebony Shine, buying mansions all over the place, in Brazil, in South Africa, in Switzerland, in France, in the USA, buying luxury cars in every country that I have mentioned over here, places where Theodorin had dozens of the most expensive cars you can imagine, right? Maseratis and Lamborghinis, and including cars, the Koenigsegg, for which, one car alone was over $5 million, right? So let's put that in perspective, right? Here you have a person that owned millions and millions of dollars in cars, a private jet, luxury mansions all over the place, while the country is destitute poor, right? Most people in my country still today are living on less than $1 a day, right? So in the case of the USA, millions of dollars were coming into the USA. The US Senate did an investigation and discovered that $700 million had come from oil companies into Riksbank and disappear into accounts controlled by President Obiang and his son Gabriel. Eventually find out also that, about $130 million also came into the US thanks or with the help of US lawyers and accountants to Malibu, where a mansion was bought, Michael Jackson's stuff, memorabilia was bought, private jet was bought, all that stuff by Theodorin, right? So the US government, DOJ, Department of Justice, with the help of investigators from Homeland Security, tracked that money and tracked all the way to who the owners were and discovered that Teodorin was behind all that wealth. All that wealth they had come into the US in violation of anti-money laundering regulation, right? And the DOJ instituted a case against him. And once the case was filed, in violation of US law, because once, if there is a case against you in the US for a car and you remove that car, take it back to Equatorial Guinea, that's a violation of a basic statute or basic litigation statute, right? So once that case was already started, Teodorin managed to take out the private jet with all the luxury cars and all the Michael Jackson stuff, take it back to Malabo, right? So the case ended up being just about the mansion and a few things that he couldn't remove, right? But to give you a sense of the impunity that these guys act with, even once that case had started in the US, Teodorin was showing off all the Michael Jackson stuff he had gotten in the Equatorial Guinean Cultural Center in Malabo, in the center of Malabo. All that stuff was on display, you know. Come see what the US is trying. Yes. this is a fact.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So, and again, impunity, right? In the case of Switzerland, a couple of yachts initially seized. He managed to escape with ice. So Ebony Shine, the other yacht, remains in parked in a port in Harlingen in the Netherlands. Eventually, the case settled. Right, it was that yacht and about, I believe it was maybe 18 cars. I think. Eventually, that case settles. The yacht is returned to Teodorin. The cars are auctioned off with the idea that those cars will be auctioned off and the revenues from that auction would be used for the benefit of the people. Teodorin, through a middleman, repurchases 12 of those 18 cars, right? Not only repurchases them, but a couple of weeks later, he's seen Galvan, they're walking around Malabo, driving in one of the Lamborghinis and stuff, right? So that's the type of impunity that we're dealing with here, right?
Okay, but just interrupt quickly. How was he able to repurchase 12 of the 18? How is that possible?
Through a middleman. What we know, is that those auctions were held. The auction was held in Geneva. It was open to people that could afford those cars, right? And one of the buyers whose information cannot be disclosed by the auctioning house went in posing as a rich buyer from Dubai and purchased 12 of the cars, right? What we know is that later on those cars showed up in Equatorial Guinea. Right.
Wow. So basically using a middle person
using a middleman
to represent him.
And because thanks to secrecy laws, I'm being sarcastic here, thanks to beautiful secrecy laws in Switzerland, you cannot disclose the identity of who is buying it or who is behind the buyer. Well, it wasn't, but that poses another risk, right? Later on, which I know we'll get into later on, when you return monies to a place like Equatorial Guinea, where the same people that stole it are in power, how do you ensure that any NGO that is applying for that money coming from Paris, that Teodorin is not behind, or that some government officials not behind, where with this country that we're describing to you is one that is so absolutely controlled by one family. But Lucas will tell you a little bit more about the case in France, which has even additional details, which, and in my case, is perhaps one of the most important cases, only because it went all the way, and it was, unlike the US case, which was a civil asset forfeiture case, a case against the property. In the French case, it was a criminal case against the person as well as the property, right? And I think the precedent from that case is very, very important for all of us fighting or combating kleptocracy in Africa and all over the place, because a human being is held to account, is sentenced, despite the challenges, but is sentenced here. So Lucas, take it from there.
Wow, that's a lot that you broke down. Yes, Lucas, please, if you can break down that. That would be great.
Regarding the case in France, so one of the things that we have to keep in mind is the fact that The case was launched in around 2005, 2006, but it got stuck for a while because the French authorities, not only, I would say more the authorities than the judiciary, had problems in continuing with the case. So I think that's an important element, because even with the case that you just mentioned in Switzerland, there is a sort of lack of full monitoring of what is going on also in certain countries, because when money flows in, there is less control than when it goes out, for instance, right? So these countries are also should be also putting in better monitoring systems to make sure that the money cannot flow as easy as it does, particularly when there are suspicious movements of funds. In the case of Equatorial Guinea, as Tutu mentioned, back in the years, the Theodorin was Minister of Agriculture, and it was not justified for him to have to purchase a mansion in the middle of Paris, in the most elegant area in Paris, with, as you mentioned, 101 rooms and all the type of luxury and that you can imagine that could be found there. And that's something that made the judiciary to follow up the case. Now, as I was mentioning, the authorities were not keen to prosecute the case, but there was a few NGOs that actually appealed up until a maximum level possible to keep prosecuting or keep the case alive. And that for the first time in the whole world, there was a sentence in the jurisdiction that allowed an NGO based on the United Nations Anti-Corruption Convention to actually pursue and sue someone in court. Well, that changed the perspective from the judiciary in France, and the French judiciary, then the prosecutors started investigating, and then a lot of more things came out of investigations, and that's where we learned from all the additional things that he bought. We knew even more about the cases in the US, etc., etc. But this is a case that showcases, if I may say, the perfect example that you could put in a teaching book about what not to do or what to do in a corruption case. Equatorial Guinea as a country tried to protect also Theodorin by doing a few things that were not surprising for us from Equatorial Guinea, but shocking internationally. One of them was to appeal to the International Court of Justice, claiming that he had immunity. Not only him, but the building that was seized also had they claimed that it hosted the diplomatic mission of Equatorial Guinea. But both those claims failed to succeed in the International Court of Justice, which is important, which means that there is a common understanding, a common sense of what lines are impossible to cross in terms of international justice or international for prosecuting corruption. And that's, I think, something that those that would still keep working on this are going to learn from, to know what can happen next in future cases. And just to summarize, finish about the case, I just wanted to mention that the highest court in France, as you mentioned earlier, closed the case that even made it stronger, the sentence against him. So the case was first was sentencing him to a fine, apart from the 3 years suspended jail term. But the government, oh sorry, the judiciary in France put back the fine, and he is supposed to pay the fine, which is around 30 million euros that he has to pay. And I think that's part of what I was also mentioning that is interesting to discuss about what can happen next if you get the seized funds and the fines being paid. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go into that, because all these items, these luxury items, whether they're boats, watches, cars, they've all been collected and they all been auctioned off or sold. So there's money to be recouped to the people of Equatorial Guinea, because from what I understand, these items were purchased through public funds, if I'm not mistaken. So how is the item seized and the selling of these items? Is it a definite that they're going back to the people of Equatorial Guinea and social programs? How is it being set up, if so? Or is that going to be something that's going to take a few years in the making to actually happen or execute?
Mm-hmm. So where it is less clear is in Switzerland, right? Because Switzerland, similar to where France was several years ago, does not have a specific law that says assets from a kleptocrat seized in Switzerland will be returned, right? However, internationally, there is enough conversation, there is enough agreement right now that that's what should happen, that even Switzerland, at least verbally have committed to doing that, right? In the case of the US, it is clear that that's what's going to happen. And in fact, there is a process right now for that to happen. To be more specific, when Eric Holder was the Attorney General, and someone, I think it was President Obama, someone by that name was president. When Obama was president, he signed a law into being basically the Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Initiative, right? So a body was created in DOJ whereby any assets seized through a process in which kleptocrats were involved will be returned to those countries, all right? And in the case of Equatorial Guinea, those monies are part of a judicial settlement, right? They arrive at a settlement, and the settlement spells out exactly what is supposed to happen with the money, right? 2/3 of that money, for instance, is supposed to be used in Equatorial Guinea for the benefit of the people of Equatorial Guinea, but through a consensus agreement between Equatorial Guinea and the US. They were unable to reach that consensus, and the judicial settlement also spells out that in case of lack of agreement, then a body should be created of 3 panelists that should decide that. And that's where they are right now, where there are 3 individuals, one appointed by the US, one appointed by the Equatorial Guinea, and one mutually agreed upon, who are in the process of deciding whether that money should be spent to procure vaccines for COVID, or whether they should be used to help victims of a recent blast, a recent explosion that happened in the city of Bata, or how else can that money be used? So they are in the process of deciding that. The other 1/3, $10 million, is basically the Department of Treasury right now, and the US government hopefully soon will be deciding how that money is returned. Lucas, myself, and many other civil society activists have been in several conversations with folks, with prosecutors on the DOJ, about different ways in which monies can be returned to Equatorial Guinea without going through the well-known pockets of Equatorial Guinean government officials, right? And we're hoping that, they will look at all the proposals that we have already shared with them and do that. In the case of France, which is the newest kid on the block, so to speak, there is a law. There is now a law that clearly says that, these monies will be going to, I believe it's the Ministry of International Development. Is that correct, Lucas? International Development, yes. And NGOs or individuals or, groups from the country could, Equatorial Guinea in this case, will be able to apply for monies to do different activities, different projects, right? I believe as of now, I haven't looked deeply into the law, but my sense, is that is how it's supposed to work. People applying to the Ministry of International Development and getting funds to implement projects in Equatorial Guinea. Lucas, anything to add on that front, on the French front?
Yeah, no, just that one of the challenges, particularly in the French case, was to find the best way to make sure that all the processes are carried out in a very transparent way, and also to have maybe civil society in this case able to monitor and also to make sure that the funds arrive to the population. Of course, we have seen examples, I guess Nigeria, we've seen examples of funds returned from the Swiss and again lost to corruption. And these are some lessons that we need to learn from to avoid that this doesn't happen again in Equatorial Guinea. In other countries, one of the things that happen is that normally the person that is being sentenced or prosecuted is not in power any longer, and it helps move things faster, if I may say. In the case of Equatorial Guinea, we don't have that luxury, and we don't have also the luxury of waiting for a change in the system or in the regime to help the population that is in need. We have to see it. We have to see the perspective of this. Equatorial Guinea's educational budget can be funded for 5 or 10, or almost 10 years, with only the funds that were seized in France. And if we count on other funds elsewhere, it would be even higher. This is the same with the cost of a yacht that we spoke earlier. This would be more than enough to cover for health, for hospitals in the rural areas, for instance, that the country is in need. And this is not me saying it, or NGOs or I don't know, people just speaking. It's just the own government data shows that almost 75% of the schools do not have access to water or to electricity. And most of them, around 60%, more than half of them at least, they don't have latrines, they don't have bathrooms. I mean, water closets for people, for kids to access to, which is appalling in a country where the oil is rich in oil as it is. And again, I keep saying this. This is not about even politics. It's about the fact that the population is in deep need.
I see. Wow, what a the backstory and the current sitting president. This is a fascinating case. And after all what you just explained, even about the funds, the possibility of the transferring and back into the hopefully social programs, education, and things at hospitals and health. Hopefully that will happen very soon than later. So I want to just go back to something. So with the verdict in France, even though you said it was civil, but it's criminal as well. So again, if you can just reiterate, will anything happen to the vice president? Is he supposed to be in jail right now, or is he awaiting a warrant for his arrest, or what's going on?
No, I might have misspoken if I did say that. I mean, I think the case in France was not civil, it's criminal, it's against the person. So, but however, the sentence against the person in that case was a suspended sentence. So basically a 3-year suspended sentence. So he does not have to go to jail for those 3 years. It wasn't clear to me, Lucas, perhaps you might have an answer, whether they decided to give it suspended because of his position as vice president, or because of the length that it has taken. Because as Lucas said, this case started in 2005, 2006 initially, then it was refiled again I think in 2007. So it's been a long time. So often here in the US at least, there are times where time served can count, or if it's been a case that's been going for 20 years, they might give you a suspended sentence. In the case of Theodorin, that is the case, so he will have to pay a fine. All his assets were confiscated, but he does not have to go to jail. He just gets a 3-year suspended sentence.
Yeah.
The case in the US was sorry, Lucas.
Yeah. Just to say that in the French system, if you have a sentence less than 3 years and without any criminal record, then you can avoid going to jail. So that's where he sort of avoided the sentence. That's the main reason.
Okay, I see. He maneuvered around that somehow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's good to know at least it has at the end of the day that this finances or funds that have been seized or sold based on the items being sold, that it can go back to the people of Equatorial Guinea. Like I said, I hope that can happen sooner than later, and that something good at least is coming out of it. You all have anything that you want to say, final words or final remarks?
Yes. Before, hopefully we have time to touch on the issues of the sanctions, because I think that adds a layer that is important for those of us that want to hold our kleptocrats accountable. Before even touching on the issue of sanctions, I think it is important for us to impress upon Africans, whether we are in the diaspora, whether inside the country, the importance of participating in these conversations about what happens to these assets. Earlier, when I was talking about, dispelling the myth that, Western countries should not be holding our kleptocrats accountable. I hope people now understand why it is important when inside your country, your government officials act with absolute impunity. It is important to have an international forum, a regional forum, or somewhere where these people can be held accountable. Having said all that, I hope it's settled for most of our audience here, then it becomes important, critically important, that us Africans take part in the conversation about what happened to those resources. In the case of Nigeria, what happened to all the millions and millions that the Babangida family has stolen and stashed away? Once this money has come back, how do we reincorporate that into Nigeria? How do we incorporate money from the Sassou Nguesso family back into Congo eventually? Because as of now, there have been a lot of conversations, from civil society, international civil society, they then came together and put together these principles on accountable asset return, right? And talks about the importance of transparency and participation of civil society, integrity, accountability, victim restitution, etc. But that has been mostly, the big NGOs from the West, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Transparency International, those big international groups. We need African voices at those tables, right? Talking about, okay, this is why it is important for us for this money to come. And when we are engaging in this work, these are the challenges that we're still facing, right? Because as Lucas was saying, when these monies are easily transported or easily stashed in Western countries, Western banks might feel, oh, this is great for our banks, but they don't realize the risk that it creates in this country, the poverty that it further exacerbates in this country, the real danger that it poses to human rights activists, anti-corruption activists that want to expose these cases, right? Lucas and I have a good friend who was nearly killed by the Equatorial Guinean government for doing this type of work, right? So it is important for friends and those people to understand that, and the only way they're going to understand it is if us Africans take part in these conversations and in our advocacy, whether it's in the US, in the European Commission, or principally in the African Union, make these points clearly to our government, to our national representative in those institutions.
I think that's great that you put that message out there, and thank you for that, because it is very important, and Africans in the diaspora, they do need to get involved. In the case of because we're here in the US with African Americans, they repatriate back to Africa a lot. finding their roots and things of that nature. And I think it's important for them to also understand what's going on in the countries that they go to, and how it affects and impacts them as well. And I've heard a lot from those who repatriate back to Africa and whatever countries that they are impacted by corrupt systems there. So I'm glad that you put that message out there. And I think it is very important that you do have to have Africans in the diaspora involved, because they're the ones who are on the ground. They're the ones who are impacted by corrupt systems. And I really do think that that's important. Is there any other ways that people can help, or people can get in contact with you? If you would like to put that out there, if you don't want to put it out there for security reasons, that's fine.
Yes.
I understand.
I mean, I think, yes. Security reasons. No, I think there are many ways, right? I think going back to what I just said, right? I don't know if I'm correct, but perhaps you might be from Nigeria, because you mentioned earlier that many of your programs are about Nigeria. And the reason I'm saying that, is that because when Theodorin has a party, who does he invite to his party to perform? It tends to be artists from Nigeria, artists from the US, right? So P Square, I believe his name has been in Equatorial Guinea now several times. So has Ludacris and all these big fancy rappers and hip hop artists from the US and Nigeria and other African countries. So and here's a perfect case. And I'm mentioning the guys, but there are also many women, Erika Badu and I'm blanking all their fancy names right now, but all of them, what's the Anaconda lady? I can't remember her name. All of them, tend to flock to Equatorial Guinea and to Swaziland and to Zimbabwe and to Angola to perform to all these kleptocrats, from Isabel dos Santos and Mugabe and those, for millions and millions of dollars, in a context where people do not have running water, do not have electricity, do not have hospitals, do not have schools, right? So yes, we have to get engaged in the accountability part, but we also have to get engaged in demanding more from our artists, from our movie stars, from all these big names that we now have in Africa. We have to demand more from them. We cannot have a situation where poor people are dying in our streets and you have P Square performing in a multi-million-dollar hotel or setting for Theodorin for his birthday, or Ludacris, or the other guy, So that is something that we have to change. We have to change. A few years ago, there was something called the Leon Sullivan Foundation based in Washington, D.C. That was set by former Congressman Leon Sullivan. And after he died, his daughter, Hope Sullivan, was running it. And they accepted, I believe it was $3 million by Obiang to put together a human rights conference in Equatorial Guinea. Right? This is a country that does not respect human rights, yet here you have an organization, a foundation in the name of a prominent African-American civil rights fighter, civil rights activist in Equatorial Guinea claiming to be doing human rights. Or when you have UNESCO taking $3 million to set an award initially named in the name of President Obiang to promote health, science, education, when inside the country, the president is not putting $3 million to promote health, science, and education. So there are all these incongruent things happening that we Africans should not be part of. It's important that we not be part of that. And when we see any of our artists, any of our celebrities taking part of that, we have to call them out. We have to shame them for doing that.
I see. Wow. You just brought me you just educated me on that. And I didn't even know that with Hope Sullivan. And wow, UNESCO, that's so very true. And thank you again for bringing it to our attention. And that's so true, because now we begin to sound like hypocrites as we are kind of infueling and actually kind of like, as if we are accepting their behaviors as government officials, or we should be accepting their behavior in the government capacity. So, wow, that's very important that you mentioned that as well. Again, I know the time, it's almost been an hour. Would you all like to add anything else? Is there a contact information or a website that people can go to if they want to learn more about Equatorial Guinea and the things that are going on there with the president and all his men?
Yes. Well, in the case of myself, EG Justice, it's easy to find us, right? EG as in Equatorial Guinea, egjustice.org. And, we often publish information about, what's happening, but tends to be, policy briefs and press statements and documents. They're not super interesting to people. They're not in policy making capacity, but that's the place, right? Then Lucas and I are members of something called the Equatorial Commission of Jurists. And I believe we have information not just in Spanish, but also in English about also legal issues and legal positions based on what's happening in Equatorial Guinea. I believe, Lucas, you should correct me on this, but our website, I believe, is Comisión Ecuatoriana de Juristas, CEJ, is it cej.org?
Sorry, it's I will set it around if you want for you to put it in on the comment side, but because it's Juristas GE.
Juristas GE.
Yeah, juristasge.org. Juristas with J at the beginning. Anyway, because it is in Spanish, so it might be difficult to put it out.
Well, we can share that with you, and we're also part of a platform, civil society platform of democracy activists, working to promote to bring about democracy in Equatorial Guinea, which Lucas can also share with you. That is is a platform of organizations. So it's GE Nuestra, which means ours, our Equatorial Guinea. So those are resources that we can share with you. I mean, I think one issue that we, unfortunately, it seems we won't have time to touch is the issue of sanctions, right? Right now, at least in the US, there is the Global Magnitsky Act, which provides a sanction regime to sanction kleptocrats, people engaging in corruption crimes or people engaging in human rights crimes. The UK has adopted a similar sanction regime, and the EU has also adopted a regime that sanctions primarily, individuals involved in gross human rights violations. And we don't have time to touch on this, but I think that is important for us living in countries where we have kleptocrats and human rights violators running the country, because it creates an incentive, a place, a forum, where we can submit, as civil society, as individuals from the country, we can submit dossiers on these individuals and request that the EU, the UK, and the US impose sanctions on them, freeze their assets, freeze any assets, and confiscate any assets they might have in the UK, EU, or US, and also bans them from traveling to the US and those countries. And that's important, and again, if any member of your audience is interested, is listening to this and is interested, please reach out to me at tutu@egjustice.org. I'll put you in touch with more resources, other individuals and organizations doing this type of work. But it's important that we make the world a much smaller place for these kleptocrats, right? Right now, formerly Teodorin will go to France, US, and other places to spend his looted assets. Right now, that number of countries that he can go to is becoming smaller and smaller, and we want to limit him to where all he can go to is either Zimbabwe or Equatorial Guinea. Nothing bad about Zimbabwe. Maybe Nigeria and Equatorial Guinea. How is that?
That sounds great. And I would myself personally be interested in connecting with you on that. I think if we can do a follow-up interview, that'll be good, either with the both of you, and we can do a follow-up on those sanctions that you want to speak about, because I think that's also very important for people to know, and how can they get involved, because we are also connected with other different countries, as I mentioned, Nigeria and Cameroon, and particularly that's where I trace my ancestry at. So I'm very much interested in connecting with you on that, and how about doing a second interview on that in particular would be great if you are available.
Happy to do that. Happy to do that. I mean, I think it's important no tool that is available to us, you know, and it's important that we use it. As of now, there are already some African people on that list in the US, for instance, right? The UK recently admitted Theodorine, but in the US list, there are already some Africans, you know, mainly people engaged in the wars in Congo, and Yaya Jammeh, former dictator in Gambia. But there are more Africans that deserve to be on that list, you know, so let's talk about that sometime.
Okay, well, thank you so much to the both of you for taking the time out and just being with us and educating us on Equatorial Guinea, the vice president, the funds, the embezzlement, and going even further deeper in our next interview on those sanctions and how people can get involved in promoting, because this is actually a part of promoting good governance as well, and keeping our leaders held accountable. So thank you so much. Thank you, Lucas Olu and Tutu Alicante. We really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Thank you so much. Any last words, or are you great?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. God bless to you both. And we will be in contact. Lucas, you can send me the links, and then I will put them up along with the video once I post it onto our YouTube channel.
I will share with you right away. Yeah, via WhatsApp. It's faster.
Thank you so much, and God bless to you both.
All right. Ciao, ciao.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.